All right, guys, welcome back. Today's class is going to be more beginner friendly. It's going to be more tailored to everybody that's struggling to sort of kind of get started as to how they should play the game, what characters they should be picking, and really what route they should be moving into when they're trying to pick a main. Right? The console thing just came out, right? Like everybody's playing on console. There's a lot of people that are getting interested in the game because of other reasons, right? So today's class is going to be tailored for that particular player. I am going to be talking about how you should pick your main and other things you should be aware of when you're picking characters in the select screen, right? Things that you should be aware of when picking a character in the map. And at the end of the class, I'm going to be giving you guys 3 strategies you can pick for your main. This is a big reminder. Thank you for everybody that has been subscribing to the channel. We've been getting a lot of support. I looked at the analytics and I see that a lot of you guys are returning viewers. So thank you so much for your support. I really do appreciate it. All right, let's get started with the video. When we're picking the character, we're going to be looking at 3 things. First, like I mentioned, I'm going to be giving you guys a decent idea of how the game normally is played, how people tend to pick characters per map, and things you should be aware of when picking a main. And then after that, I'm going to be touching on something called viability. What is the viability of an agent? Now, I am not going to go too crazy on this subject in particular, because I'm going to make a 2-part to this, where I'm going to be doing a tier list on the characters themselves and how they behaved in ranked. So things like, for example, how hard they are to master, things like how impactful they can be. For example, Reyna is really good at carrying teams, but the second that you stop getting kills, you're not as impactful. You don't really have any utility, right? And things like the simplicity of the character or just how good they are at synergizing with others. Once we look into all of that, the tier list can feel a lot more comprehensive as to what you should be looking for when you are a particular type of player. For example, you want more impact because you like more mechanical aspects of the game. You can look into that, right? So that's what's going to be covered on Friday's class. But today's class is going to be just looking at the strategies of picking a main, but viability will be touched on. And lastly, the strategies themselves. When we're looking at picking a main, it can feel really daunting considering that there's so many abilities and there's so many characters that we have to touch on. If you're someone that hasn't experienced a lot of ability-based games or a lot of character-based games, for example, hero shooters, Rainbow Six Siege kind of may feel like a hero shooter with so many operators in the game, right? All of those things, you kind of have to be aware of all of these different aspects of the game encompassing one match, right? So when you're picking a main, I need you to understand what your comfort of the game is. So for example, if you're someone that's not very comfortable with the game, or maybe you're someone that likes to play a little bit more passive, a more supportive role may be good for you. Even though there may not be an agent that fits you 100% of the time, maybe picking something that fits that type of playstyle might be good for you. Other things like understanding the abilities or the resource management might change how you pick an agent. So for example, if you're not really aware of cooldowns or how people move around the map or the timings, you might have a really hard time playing controller. But it might be really easy for you to just play something like a duelist because you don't really have to pay attention to that. For example, Phoenix is a great example of just someone that you just have to look into abilities. If you're someone that really is good with mechanics or you're someone that struggles mechanically, you can look into that as a good guideline as to what character might be good for you. So for example, if you struggle mechanically, Chamber is just not going to be for you. All their abilities are gun related. I don't really see how you would be very impactful with that character. And even though they may be fun, you're going to have to struggle a little bit before you get somewhere with them. And last but not least, overall game sense. If you're only aware of one particular character's abilities, it may be hard for you to sort of like move on from different locations, maybe different maps, using that character. You have to make sure you look at all of these things at once when picking a certain character or a certain role that really fits you. And we're going to be looking a little bit more into this when we're picking those strategies. Now, there is a little bit of an unwritten formula. Now the game is a little bit older. I feel like now people are already catching on to this. It may be unwritten, but it does feel like it's a law. Normally when you're picking, in order for you to have the best success, it is simply just by looking at the character select screen. The agent select screen gives you a wide array of different characters that you can choose, and there's 4 different roles that you can pick. Now, when you're looking at the comp that you're going to be picking, normally it is comprised of all 4 roles. There's duelists, there's initiators, there's controllers, and there's sentinels. You're going to notice that most of the time you're going to be picking 2 of a certain role, right? all of the time you're going to be picking two of a certain role, and most of the time they're going to be either duelist related or initiator related. You might see two of those most of the time. And it's not a bad idea to try to always match what that little unwritten formula is. The reason why we do this, it is one of many reasons, but the first one is to keep a healthy comp. It is well-rounded. You're making sure that you're kind of dealing with everything. So for example, sentinels are good at, locking down areas, so they may be good for flank or controlling sites on defense. Controllers are really good at blocking sight lines. So they always are really must-have to have, like, most of the time. I would say, we're going to be talking about the exceptions later, but they're really good to have. Right? Duelists are really good at taking space quickly, and they're really good at engaging in fights. So you want to make sure that you have that available to you. And initiators are a mixture of, getting that space, but at the same time helping people hold that space, with the use of information or the use of flashes, right? So when we're looking at these comps and when you're looking at the character you're going to be picking, make sure that you are aware of this formula. It's going to come back. Okay. Now that we understand those basics, we got to understand the next part, and that is that ranked isn't perfect. When you're looking at the different types of comps that you're going to be looking at, sometimes you'll see your main role be taken. So you'll have something like double duelist is picked, and you might feel tempted into picking Reyna. Maybe you flexed in the past, maybe you filled in the past, and you've been doing it way too much. And you notice that Yoru just isn't the pick. Or maybe you've seen that your Jet is just never really efficient at getting those picks. So you are really tempted into picking that character. But you know for a fact that because you've been flexing, you've been doing it for one particular reason, and that is to maintain your team in a viable state. Because what happens is, once you pick that Reyna, you've now put your team at a bigger risk of a disadvantage, and you're also putting the other players that have already picked that role into a more of a disadvantageous position. Maybe they were good when there was a flash, or when they were maybe something to hold, and now they aren't good. And you're going to be feeding into this bad system, and you got to make sure that you're always fighting that temptation to pick that extra character that might not be necessary. There are cases, though, I will mention, where you might have a role that's missing. And I've been in the given and the receiving end of those comps that win, just simply because of having either a good comp or just having a really bad comp. Okay, you can win or lose depending on that, but most of the time, you're going to be a lot more successful in picking a character that's missing from that comp. And because of that, we have to look at viability. A lot of people tend to pick characters based on to how viable they are. And when it comes to that, we have to look at how ideal they can be. Ideal does not mean that you're going to win 100% of the time. You've been in a position maybe in the past where you're flexing, and even that is just not going to be an efficient way of winning your games. Maybe picking Reyna every single round, every single game is perhaps the better way of winning your games. But at the end of the day, when you're losing, I need you to instead consider other things. So like, for example, was the enemy team better at aiming? Who had the better aim? Was it your team or the enemy team? Were there any avoidable mistakes? Any bad retakes? Maybe any bad takes? That's also important, right? And there's a lot of things like luck that still exist in the game. Maybe everybody's just losing because they're getting shot through walls, right? Do not fall into the temptation of picking a less ideal comp or something that is less viable because you've had bad luck or bad success in the past. We're going to be looking at strategies that also touch on that. So now when it comes to picking those agents, how do you pick? We're going to be looking at one of the things that, or one of the strategies that people tend to use, and that's to look at viability through what the pro players tend to use. But you're going to notice one thing in particular. You're going to notice that a lot of these characters here don't seem like the ones that you see in ranked all that much. So for example, if I scroll to the right, these are the top 15 agents, by the way, that were picked in this current map pool in the current VCT that just happened. No spoilers, but Sentinels didn't win. When it comes to all of this, however, we're going to notice that there's a couple of missing things. So for example, Clove was only picked 4% of the time. 4%, even though they are so dominant in ranked. Reyna, a whopping 0%. Nothing at all. Does that mean that both of those characters are garbage? Does that mean that they are not something you should be looking at? No. We have characters like KO, for example, at 20%. Characters that you may or may not see in ranked. A character that may seem like a random pick to you because of other characters like Gecko or Sova, right? These two characters do feel a lot stronger in ranked, yet they are picked 20%, whereas Reyna and Clove are not. Does that mean that you should be using pro play as a way of kind of getting an idea of how viable a character is? Sure, you can use that as a guideline to get started. However, there's other things that we can look at that can make a character even better. And that's what our tier list is going to cover. But for now, this is something that I would like to kind of note before we even we can move on to the next part. So let's talk about the strategies. If you're someone that's struggling and you're someone that asked this question before, this is a question that has been asked a lot in the past when it comes to different students. And this is the one that I have for everybody. The first one is to pick an agent for each role. There is no such thing as a singular player that you're going to be able to pick. There's no such thing as a single agent. You're going to be able to use the entirety of your matches. 100% of the time, you're going to be picking more than just one character. And in order for you to maintain a really wide array of characters that you can pick, I would suggest you pick one of each. Now, if you're someone that struggles, like we mentioned, with the comfort of the game, if you're struggling mechanically, you can reduce that 4 to maybe a 3 or 2. As long as you have more than one agent that you can pick, you're going to have a main idea of how the game is played, and you're going to have a main set of roles that you can kind of fulfill. When you are picking a character, make sure you're paying attention to the things we talked about. For example, if we see that 2 duelists are picked and you like to pick a lot of duelists, maybe you can go on to the next one that might need to be filled. So for example, this is how I like to pick mine. From duelist to controller to sentinel to initiator. But maybe for some other people, it might be sentinel, initiator, controller, duelist, right? Make sure you have one for each individual role. If you want to get stronger, I would suggest that you get 2 for each individual role. For example, we said that there are 2 characters that you can pick for each individual team. So maybe, for example, we have 1 Jet and 1 Reyna. Well, I don't need to pick one of those. I can pick Sova. Or I see that there are there's 1 duelist, but I can pick, we see a Sova, maybe I can pick Breach, right? Something like that is something you can do to maintain some sort of strength in your comp and some sort of strength in your gameplay, as we need to make sure that we are sort of diversifying how many things we have in our pool. If you're someone that is just getting started, I will say this is just a side tip. If you're someone that's struggling getting used to the game, pick characters that are simpler. Pick characters that are going to be a lot easier to learn. So for example, if you're someone that likes duelists, don't pick something like Jet. It might be a lot harder to get that out there. Something like Phoenix might be better for you. Other things that you should also look at is just kind of like paying attention to how much time you have to play the game. If you don't have that much time, then instead just try to master one agent and then on to the next. But this is where the next part kind of comes in. Let's say you're someone that is really struggling to pick an agent in that particular role because you want to play controller, but you don't know which one. Maybe you want to play initiator, but you don't know which one. You are now saying, okay, well, I have to pick one and I have to experiment. How do I do that? And this is where the second strategy comes in. The second strategy is to pick agents based on how strong they are per map or how successful you are per map. There's plenty of videos out there that kind of explain the strength, or maybe there's a tier list on the character that shows how good they are for that particular map. And you can kind of go and see it. I mean, at the same time, I also made a video that shows characters that are really good on a particular map. You can kind of look at that if you wish, right? But this is a really good way of learning characters, looking at characters that are really good on a map. So for example, I would have never learned Cypher in beta if I just didn't notice that Cypher, was strong. Like, I noticed that everybody picked Cypher. I decided to give him a try and I realized that he was really good. And this is how I learned Cypher, right? Things like Sova. I hated playing Sova. I rather play, other Flash initiators. But I realized that Sova is really good on that map. And now you see me almost exclusively playing Sova on Icebox. I'm even insta-locking Sova, right? Something like Abyss. Harbor, for me, does not click. However, when I noticed how strong he was on something like Abyss, I just picked him and I tried him. If you're someone that's having a hard time identifying where these agents might fit, look at what other people are doing, look at what other streamers are doing, look at some videos, maybe they have something for you. Look at the video that I made, for example, right? These are things that you can do in order to pick an agent per map. And this is how you can start looking at how you can develop or even kind of strengthen any of the characters that you may or may not know, right? This is how I picked up Gecko. I mean, you can see me here just playing Gecko on this map. I picked up confidence in learning Gecko just because I know how strong he is in this map, right? So if you feel limited or you don't really know where to start and you want to pick, one per role so you can be fully set, so by the time that you reach your desired rank, you don't feel like you're weighing your team down, well, you can start by just picking an agent per map and picking that agent that you know is strong for that map and learning them for that map specifically. And then once you get used to those little quirks of the character, you can then move on and pick that agent in other maps. Now I can pick Sova on Ascent with confidence, right? Now I can pick something like Gecko on another map like Bind with confidence, right? You can do stuff like that as you move on. The last one is a little bit more ranked related. It's a little bit more duo related. Ooh, I forgot to mute it. But when you are playing with somebody, I need you guys to consider a couple things. So the first one is, if you're playing that's with someone that really requires some sort of aggression, some sort of utility, you can actually pick an agent that fits that playstyle. Picking agents that can synergize with players that you are with is a really strong way of maintaining an agent pool. So, for example, if I'm playing with my duo and they really like playing Duelist, picking a Flash Initiator might be a good pick. I see a lot of duos that like to play double Duelist because they know that they're really good at entering together and getting frags. That could also be a really good way of maintaining that map pool, right? Sorry, not map pool, agent pool. But last but not least, when we're looking at things like per rank, that can kind of change a little bit on how you might have a hard time either picking an agent or maybe having a hard time kind of like maintaining some impact with an agent. Picking agents that are simpler because of the rank that you are in might actually be better for you. For example, Phoenix is really good in ranks like gold because people don't know how to turn flashes. You might have a really easy time picking a character that does not require that much, thought or processing just because they are a lot better in the rank that you are in. Okay. So for that reason, I want you guys to think a lot more of the characters that you're going to be picking, not just on the map, but also who you're playing with, and maybe even consider the rank that you are in. If you notice that there's some players that are really weak against a certain character, like for example, Reyna, I will always say Reyna. Reyna is always a character that could be 50-50, but maybe they're struggling with Reyna. Maybe you can pick Reyna. You can learn Reyna and you can see how that works when it comes to other maps. This strategy right here may seem a little bit more convoluted, but it's something that I need you guys to keep in mind because your rank might not really require you to know all that many agents, but you might need to know maybe a certain type of agent. So maybe having Sova on the back is always good. Okay. So with that out of the way, we're going to conclude this class. The strategy concluded with 3 different things. Pick 1 per role. And always make sure that you're kind of experimenting. You can have a really easy experimenting zone just by picking 1 per map and then just learning them there and then just move on to the next. And last but not least, you can pick according to people that you're playing with or picking according to the rank. Some ranks do change and some ranks might be easier than others depending on the agent that you're with. All right, so with that out of the way, thank you guys for watching. I'm going to close this class and start the question period.